It's a great pleasure in this series to invite somebody about a topic I'm still grappling with myself and learning more about. This is not your typical sort of like what's the latest risk in Europe or in the global economy sort of talk that I'm more used to doing in these sessions. And so I keep going back to our guest speaker tonight because when I joined SAIS, it was in the summer of 2012, and Guru had already joined us, and I think in the fall of 2009, and I had heard all about him from our colleague Pravin Krishna. And then when I finally joined as a colleague, I think he stayed for another semester, and then he left because I think he was too impatient by nature with academia, right? Especially in economics, where it now takes 6, 7, 8 years from a paper idea to a paper publication, if you're lucky. And so this was never going to be him. So Guru, first of all, thank you so much for doing this. I mean, I know you're a busy guy. We've only got 1 hour, so let me dive right in and start at the beginning of your life and career and so on. So you grow up. You're great at tennis. I think you quickly figured that out, and other kinds of sports. You grew up in Rochester in upstate New York, probably freezing half the year. And so quickly you decide in the middle of high school, okay, let me go to California for college. And so that's kind of, I think, where this story starts, as for so many in tech, in AI, is at Stanford University. So you find yourself there, I guess, since you're my age, I'm guessing late 90s, early 2000s, in startup world, in sort of the tech boom, the dot-com boom, as it was called at the time. And you get a taste of this. Yeah, you graduate, you do the sort of more traditional path. I think it was JP Morgan, 2 years investment banking. Since you're a smart guy, you're going to go to Columbia University, get a PhD in international trade and so on. You come to SAIS, that's where we met. But clearly, since SAIS, you've built a career much more at the intersection of tech, of data, of startups. So walk us through how that path evolved. Right? What was the kind of the key inflection points that led you into this AI space? Because you were into this space well before my students were using Chat GPT. And so so set the scene for us. Talk a bit about yourself and your path to where it is now.
Yeah, Matthias, thanks for the kind intro. Appreciate it. And thanks for having me. A pleasure to be back at SAIS, of course, after many years. So thanks for having me. Look, AI has been around for a while, right? And this is something I tell people and remind people, for people who don't know. I think the most recent manifestation of AI has really captured everyone's imagination in ways that previous versions hadn't. But it's been around for decades. And if you actually even look at previous versions of it, machine learning, for instance, has been around. More kind of expert systems have been around for some time. So I'll start with my, late in high school, I used to play chess a little bit. And I wouldn't say I was a great player or anything, but I really enjoyed playing chess. And I'm going to date myself, but some of you may remember, Matthias, maybe you remember, when IBM came out with Deep Blue in the late 90s, 98, I want to say, I could be off by a year or so. And it defeated Garry Kasparov, right? This computer software program defeated Garry Kasparov. That was a version of AI. Again, very different type of AI than what we have today. And so that captured my imagination as a chess player, as a technologist, as kind of a math guy. That really captured my imagination. And so when that actually started my curiosity around AI, Matthias. So when I went to college at Stanford as a CS major, you have to pick a specialization. My specialization was actually artificial intelligence, right? So again, that was late 90s. And I'll say a funny story about this. At that point, they were talking about these kind of new machine learning models and deep learning. So deep learning techniques have actually, algorithms have existed for decades. What's changed is the amount of data and compute that we can throw at these algorithms allows these algorithms to perform so much better than they did in the 90s, for instance. So I remember one of my professors saying, hey, don't go learn deep learning. It's never going to work. Right? What's funny is that's the paradigm that we operate in now. Like back then, expert systems was a much hotter paradigm for artificial intelligence. But anyways, funny joke, expert systems didn't work out, and deep learning is now the thing. Though many AI experts feel some combination of the two is actually going to be the next iteration of AI. So we'll see where that goes. But that being said, so I started in AI kind of right in college itself, and so I'll share a bit of a theme or a lesson of kind of my career that might actually be interesting for your students, and I think is actually going to be relevant later on when we talk about careers in this new world of AI, right? So the way we tend to think about careers is specialization. What are you going to be, right? When you're a kid, are you going to be a doctor? Are you going to be a lawyer? Are you going to be a professor? Are you going to be, right? And that automatically by default assumes a single path, like a single job, a single career for your life. And that's the water we swim in, right? As people who put our skills out in the labor market. And the labor market wants specialization. It wants to know, Matthias, how long have you been doing this? How long have you been thinking about this problem? Oh, you've been doing it for 20 years? Okay, you must be credible. I must be able to trust you on this. If you go back and read Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, he talks about specialization and how important specialization is. And he gives this example of a pin maker and how specialization increases productivity and all this stuff. I'm sure many of you students have read this. And of course, one way to interpret that is how important specialization is. When I read that story, my first impulse was, that is so boring. Can you imagine being a pin maker for your whole life? Right? And so that was my reaction to it. And I think that so I took a different approach of what I call a special generalist. And so what a special generalist, and I think this is going to be a paradigm shift when it comes to jobs in the future. In, Instead of specializing in one area, have a common core, have a common theme for your career, and then do a bunch of stuff around that theme. And so, for instance, I was a coder, I was a CS major. So technology was my theme. But then I've done different things. I was a coder, I was an engineer, I was an investment banker in the technology space. I was a researcher and academic. I was a consultant at McKinsey in the technology space. At Capital One, I was a senior executive leading big technology teams. I was an entrepreneur and an investor. All these things, all around a common core of technology. But by doing all these different things, I think I can solve problems in a fundamentally different way than a specialist can. While specialist is awesome, they have blind spots. And my hypothesis was if you can approach a problem or a core in 10 different ways, you can unlock out of the box thinking, creative thinking in a way that specialists might actually struggle with. So that's how I've approached my career. And I actually think we'll talk about this later. What does the world look like from a labor market and jobs perspective? I actually think specialists are going to be affected by AI.
Yep.
And so we'll talk about that more.
We'll come back to that.
Yeah.
So I wanna talk a little bit about the sort of tension or maybe the dichotomy between big tech and startups, right?
Yeah.
So you've operated, I mean, you mentioned you're at JP Morgan, you're at McKinsey, you're at Capital One. I mean, this is not the startup space, right?
Yeah.
And then there's the startups ecosystem. I guess you dabbled in it during your college years.
Right.
I imagine most Stanford computer science majors
Do,
did
do.
in the 90s. And of course, much more recently, right? So what are the biggest differences in how AI is
Yeah.
developed and deployed in startups versus big tech? So I'm thinking speed versus scale, risk tolerance, data access, regulation, right? Because that's of course your most recent
Yeah. Yeah.
sort of
Yeah. Yeah.
embodiment of this space has been in the using AI for AI regulation.
That's
And
right.
so talk to us about big tech versus startups.
So a couple big differences, right? The first is again, I want to almost do pre 2022 and post 2022 because again, post 2022 that's a real inflection point. 2022 when ChatGPT came out, when language models came out into the public use, right? Again, before that, AI had been around and had been around mostly in the context of machine learning models. Okay. And I want to draw a dichotomy here. Machine learning models, which you're familiar, I'm sure your students are familiar with, requires large amounts of data and even compute, right? Startups don't have large amounts of data, right? So if I'm a B2C technology company, right? Think about Meta, for instance, right? Meta was using AI big time in the over the years. Google, right? But they have huge volumes of data. Capital One, incredible amount of AI. But think about the number of transactions, the amount of transaction volume of data that Capital One has. Think about the data that Meta has, the data that Google, terabytes and terabytes and terabytes of data that they can use in their AI models. A startup doesn't have that,
Mm,
right? So startups until 2022, startups were really not in the AI space. They were not using AI. They
mm,
were not using machine learning. It wasn't something they could use, right? They were using other types of methodologies and techniques and tools, but AI was not machine learning was not of their purview. So that's one big distinction. Now that is completely flipped, right? Generative AI is a very different technology, and it exposes you to very different ways of using AI technology that now almost every single, there's so many startups that are AI first, that are able to use AI. So that's one big difference. The other big difference is speed. Okay. And think about this, right? If you're a startup, and I was just in these shoes until very recently, if you're a startup, how do you go compete against a big company like IBM? IBM was one of our competitors.
mm.
Okay. IBM's got scale, they got brand. There's a saying that nobody ever gets fired for hiring IBM, right? You can get fired for hiring a startup and then not having it work out, right? So, they got the brand, they got distribution, they have the dollars. So how would you compete against an IBM? There's only one way you can outcompete IBM as a startup, and
You
that's
have to be
speed.
faster.
That's speed.
Okay.
IBM is slow as heck, right? They come up with an idea and doesn't come out for 5 years, right? So that is your competitive advantage as a startup. And so what AI has enabled is for startups to compete even faster against incumbents. And so it is changing the game. And I've seen both sides of that. That helped us as a startup. And so we were able to outcompete a bunch of incumbents and grow much, much, much faster. And we were able to benefit from that. And that's why we got acquired by one of the incumbents in this space, right? They saw what we were able to do in a short amount of time would have taken them 3, 4, 5 years. And they're like, okay, well, might as well acquire them. And now that I'm in a larger company, we've slowed down a little bit, right? And so I'm seeing the pain of that as well.
Yeah.
And so those are the differences. And I think AI is changing the game in terms of how startups compete against larger companies. And if I were a larger company, I would be very worried.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit more about the startup landscape then. I mean, it's fascinating that they weren't in the AI space until like, less than 5 years ago. That's
Yeah.
astonishing.
Yeah.
So where are we in this cycle, right? I mean, there seems to be a lot of hype. Are we in the hype phase? Are we in the consolidation phase? Is this still early innings? So where do you see, I guess, the most durable value being created? What areas are overhyped? I mean, you must have some sense for this after the last sort of 2, 3, 4 years in this.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think it's actually being appropriately hyped, and it's being hyped a lot. But I think it's being appropriately hyped. I actually think this is going to be the single most important topic of the next decade for society, with unquestionably, right? And multiple dimensions. We're thinking about
Elaborate, please.
yes, yes. Thinking about the business use cases of this, right? How it's going to transform businesses,
Yeah,
creative destruction, all of that kind of stuff. Jobs, education, safety, relationships, regulatory systems, public policy, like all of these things are going to have to orient around AI because it's that transformative in my view. And I see the private sector moving much, and I see kind of a spectrum of who's moving fast and who's moving slow, right? And if you look on that spectrum, you have these core players who are in this inner circle of AI, like Anthropic releasing models every 6 months that are exponentially better than the previous version, right? Think about this, Matthias, if or all of you, right? Go back and remember how good ChatGPT was. I think it was GPT 3.5 was ChatGPT in November of 2022. If you play with the latest manifestations of Claude or GPT or Gemini, that progress is significantly more than any human being I've seen learn in the course of what, 3.5 years. You see what I'm saying? These things are growing at rates that no human can grow at, right? And improving at rates. So that speed is remarkable. And yet, when I look at most of society who are not in this bubble that I'm in, they're not moving at that rate. And so this is something we'll talk about later about some of the risks of all of this. But that's one of the big risks I see is how imbalanced the access and the capabilities around this are. In terms of the hype, look, I think this is a really, really big deal. I actually also want to stop for a second and talk about the concept of hype, right? I think hype gets a bad rap sometimes. I think hype is actually instrumental. And I think Joseph Schumpeter talks about this in Creative Destruction. Hype is actually instrumental as part of the capitalistic creative destruction process. And here's why. You have information asymmetries. When a new technology comes out, we don't know what to do with it. Businesses don't know what to do with it. Society doesn't know what to do with it. We need to learn how to put it to use. And Matthias actually asked that question. What are some of its good use cases? What are some of its bad use cases? Like where is it being useful? Where is it not being useful, right? Like we need to learn those things. In order to learn those things, you have to run thousands of experiments. And in order to run thousands of experiments, you need talent and investment dollars to go run those experiments. And what draws those talent and investment dollars? Hype, right? So the hype cycle, what it does is it draws talent and investment dollars to this field. You have a bunch of startups and a bunch of companies going and investing and trying to figure out all these different use cases for AI and trying to figure out where the value is. 90% of them are going to fail, but then in a couple of years, we're going to know, wait, this is really powerful for XYZ reasons. And so we'll get that information from that process. And so hype is necessary to iterate quickly and determine where the value is, which is ultimately what we need from a capitalistic process and creative destruction process. So hype is important. I think it gets a bad rap sometimes, but it's actually important from a macroeconomic perspective. In terms of where the value is, I'll give you some examples. Super valuable right now in terms of coding. It's incredible. We built a pretty sophisticated AI software, okay, that if I had to guess would have taken an engineering team of 20 people, um, pre-2023. We did it with 7 engineers. Okay. I hear that story over and over and over again of like 2x, 3x, 5x type of productivity increases on the engineering side with talented engineers working with AI systems, right? There's an analogy I'll give you. When AI came into the chess world, for many, many years, an AI program plus a human program was better than just the best human or just the best AI. Okay. I see that happening now. I see AI humans working with AI systems being better than just humans or just AI. Okay. And you're seeing this very neatly in kind of the engineering space where humans and AI systems working to develop code in a really, really fast pace. I see automation of activities such as call center activities, back office workflows like financial workflows, HR workflows. I see automation of marketing activities, and then automation of compliance activities. So these are some of the automations that I see AI really having a lot of value in, and some of these businesses doing well. There's a company, Harvey. I don't know if you've heard of it. Automation of AI in the legal space, one of the fastest growing companies of all time, right? So seeing those kinds of examples of automating workflows, automating research, automating kind of intelligence in some of these disciplines, again, compliance being one, et cetera, marketing being another. These are some really, really powerful use cases and value props. The overhype, at least in the short term, in my view, is all the conversations around jobs.
Mhm.
I think in the medium term, yes, this is a big deal. But in the short term, I think it's not going to happen tomorrow, right? It's going to take some time to unfold. And that's where I think some of the overhype and over concern is a little over dramatized.
Mm. I like the idea of necessary hype, and we both have young daughters. So I'm gonna, whenever they say I'm hyping something, I'm gonna say, listen, Schumpeter
Is it
says it's necessary,
necessary? I like
necessary hype. So
it.
let's bring this more to our audience here, right? I mean,
Yes, yes.
we're training our students to be sort of to analyze risk and uncertainty, and so I mean, concretely, I'm just thinking
Yeah,
next year or a few years from now, or even now, how can AI and data tools
yeah.
improve how we assess political, economic, geoeconomic risk? So think about, we're dealing with forecasting versus classification, early warning signals. How do you
Mhm.
integrate qualitative with quantitative data? Because I think what many people like you and me, many of our colleagues of our generation. So, I'm gonna age us. So like mid, slightly be gentle for mid 40s to late 40s sort of generation. I mean, how wonderful. You have 20 years of experience in your field.
Yeah.
You use AI and you immediately know whether it's good or bad. Or you can immediately quiz it. It's almost like a sparring partner, right? I think many of our colleagues in academia use it that way to
Yeah.
make them better researchers.
Yeah.
But then I imagine being 18 or being 22 or being 25. Yeah, I mean the risk is you'll just use it and it'll give you something and it's actually terrible. It's making up stuff or it's completely wrong. And so talk to us a bit about how to use this as a tool for risk analysis.
Yeah, let me come to the risk analysis. I want to hit your first point. That is such a crucial point. And, many of your students are going to walk out of here remembering this point, I think, which is we are lucky, right? And we're lucky, our generation, Matthias, because we built the foundational skills to be able to work with the AI systems and allow and enable it to make us 2x, 5x, 10x more better, right? And but if you don't develop those foundational skills, you're not going to be able to do that sparring partner, right? And that's the challenge. I've actually been talking to school districts about this concept because I think there's a fundamental real alignment that needs to happen about what does education need to look like?
What do we teach? Yeah.
Yeah, what do we teach? What do we need people to be good at to be able to work with these systems? And this actually goes back again to the chess example of like you could if you have the right skills, you and the AI can be better than any AI system on its own, right? I'll give you one more analogy, which I think is quite useful. So they did this experiment with self-driving cars, okay? And there's different levels of self-driving where I think one is like a cruise control, which we've had for like decades.
This
Two
was
is
in California, Guru.
yeah,
This was in
yeah,
India,
yeah.
which is
And
more
two is
advanced.
like two is like self-parking, and five is like fully autonomous, right?
Yeah.
So that's the scale in self-driving cars. And what they found was level four was better than level five. Can you guess why, Matthias?
No, I can't.
Yeah, it's
I'll have
because
to ask AI.
I put you on the spot there, but no, this is why. It's because with level five, the human checks out.
Yeah.
It's
Oh, yeah.
fully autonomous.
Yeah.
They don't pay attention.
You fall asleep.
You fall
Yeah.
asleep. Level four, you are still aware, you are still accountable, you still can take the reins. It runs at 90%.
Yeah.
But if anything goes wrong, the human can intervene and save the situation, right? That is the optimal. But you can only get to that point if you have the skills. If you don't know how to drive, if you never drove before, that's the problem that you're alluding to. So let's bring this
A
now to
12-year-old couldn't fix it, but a
the
30-year-old.
12-year-old couldn't. Exactly. So let's bring that now to risk analysis, right? Because I think it's actually very, very pertinent, right? So these AI systems by themselves are not going to be the panacea for risk. Where they can improve things, I'll give you some examples. One is the data, right? So what I mean by that is previously, again, with statistical models and machine learning models, you had to have structured data. And structured data is a very small percentage of overall data. So you are missing a lot of signal that's out there if you're only working with structured data. Okay. And I'm sure you guys are talking about this in your course, right? And now with unstructured data, you have access to all of that unstructured data. So that is a huge, huge, huge thing. The second thing you can use these AI systems for is this concept of what did you call the debate. You can literally, you can go build a bunch of agents and have them debate each other, right? And so if you can have a bunch of agents debate each other and then you have your own expertise and use that to bring judgment to that conversation, that is going to be infinitely better than any particular AI system or any individual human. So this is again how like the combination of human judgment and the power of AI, the AI today using unstructured data and so on and so forth can actually improve risk systems. But if you're just using AI and you don't know anything about this and you don't have the judgment, Matthias, it's going to be worse. And let me give you one point why. These systems tend to what I call what's known as central tendency bias.
Mhm.
Okay. What central tendency is, it actually moves away somewhat from creativity to the mean. It moves away from, if you have a distribution, right? When you think about risk, what you care about is the ends of the distribution, the out of sample outcomes, the tails of the
Tail risks.
distribution.
Yep. Yep.
Exactly. You care about the left tail, the right tail. You care about these tails. AI, if you don't intervene, will tend to move outcomes towards the central part of the distribution. And you see this actually, you see this in AI generated music, you see this in AI generated art, you see this in analytics and sports. It all moves it towards it moves it away from creativity towards like central mass, right? That's not helpful in risk. That's not helpful, right? You want to understand the tails much, much better. And so that's where, again, you need this kind of combination of AI and human judgment and that sparring to actually improve our understanding of risks.
Yep. So we've hinted at it at multiple times, but let's talk about not just the uses of AI, but the risks of AI, right? Like,
Mhm.
so what do you see as the most underappreciated risks, right? They could be economic, political, societal, coming from AI development. So I'm thinking labor market disruption, which you've hinted at, misinformation, political instability. I mean, I think it was Nate Silver posted it, but the new algorithm, the algorithms on X,
Yep.
the biggest, the following, it's 80%, 90% MAGA, 80, 90% Republican. You have the
Yeah.
New York Times that has 500 million followers, 500 million, and they get no traction, right? And so that's just one example where, like, with the world you live in. So concentration of power, systemic model risk, things of that nature. So to talk to us about this, the which the Europeans prefer to talk about rather than the
Yeah,
Americans that prefer to talk
exactly.
about opportunities.
Exactly. And look, I think both sides are missing the boat a little bit, right? In the sense of like the analogy I give you is if tomorrow you were driving home, Matthias, and I told you the traffic lights are gone, stop signs are gone, there's no traffic cops, there's no speed limits, there's no barriers to who can drive, all the safety technology in your car is gone. Are you going to be like, oh, yay, innovation? Or are you going to be like, I'm not going to get in my car
I'm
tomorrow?
I'm not getting going anywhere.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Exactly. So this whole view that some people have of like zero governance, zero regulation is actually the right answer to innovation boggles my mind. Like that is not going to improve innovation. That's going to impede innovation, right? So
Sorry to interrupt you, Guru, but you told me you recently were in Silicon Valley and that you were scared a bit. Can you give us a few, and this is off the record supposedly, even though it's recorded, but it's only for the SAIS MAGR community. But so talk to us a little bit more about that, about what you just said.
yeah, look, I don't want to scare people too much, but um, like if you're in the AI space, you see, and I'm not even in the like I'm not at Anthropic. I'm not actually seeing some of these models like that are cutting edge, and you see how powerful these are, and you know it's going to change the world, right? So, and I can see it more than someone who's not in this space. There's a spectrum here, right? I was in Silicon Valley a couple of weeks ago, talking to a lot of people, and I think there's a sentiment of like, not only is this going to change the world, it's going to change the world much faster than people think in more disruptive ways, and society is not ready.
Yeah.
And not only is society not, and so there was almost a sense of like, oh my God, what do we do about this, right? And then the next reaction was, oh well, I'm just going to go make money on this, right? So that was the disappointing part of like, hey, that's a weird reaction to something you think that's going to be pretty disruptive, right? Is I'm just going to go take care of myself and then I'll let others worry about themselves. So anyways, that's kind of the exchange I was talking about. But I think yeah, when you talk to these folks and when you're in this space, you see it's almost like you get to see the tsunami coming and you see all these people hanging out at the beach
Yeah.
and they're reading their book, they're sipping their drinks, they're playing beach volleyball, and you're like, oh shit, like this tsunami is coming, right? So I think that's a little bit of what I was talking about. But look, when I think about risks, I think I have like 6 or 7 buckets here. Education, I think that's a huge one. AI is going to impact education. What are we teaching our kids? What are they learning? What is important to learn? We talked about this in order to be able to work in an AI world, to be able to work with these systems, etc. Jobs, obviously, safety. This is, in the context of how many examples we've seen. of kids, doing suicide or embarking on things that they shouldn't be. So one of the interesting features about these AI systems, I don't know if any of you have seen the show Pluribus. Anyone know it's on Apple TV? So it's actually an interesting show, but it's a bit of a metaphor for our AI world. These AI systems are sycophantic, right? And it's not clear how they became sick. They have some interesting properties called emergent properties that are not programmed in. They just emerge, right? And it's not clear how they emerge, right? And the sycophancy is one of them, right? And the sycophancy is if you've interacted with these AI systems, I'm sure you've learned it tries to please you,
Mhm.
right? It flatters you, it agrees with you almost every time. Like you have to be very deliberate in asking for it to take the other side, to put forth a different proposition, et cetera, right? And so this has led, so if you have a certain bias in your mind, or if you have a certain tendency to say, oh, I'm depressed right now, it'll agree with you and be like, yeah, you should be depressed. Here, let me take you in that direction, right? So it overemphasizes certain tendencies that we have in bad directions. So that's what I mean by safety. Security. I don't know if any of you read the New York Times article about Anthropic yesterday. Raise your hand if you did. Anyone see this? Okay. They put out forth their most, check it out. Do read it. It's probably still there. Google it. This is terrifying. They put out their most recent model and they said they were not going to make it generally available.
Mhm.
And the reason for that is
I did
this,
see the reference to it. Yeah, they gave it
yeah,
to a bunch of companies, right?
yeah, they only gave it to a couple companies. And this is why this AI system is so powerful. It was able to detect security vulnerabilities in every single software out there. Think about every software out there. Software runs everything now, from complex businesses and companies to our energy infrastructure, to our weapons, everything. And what it was saying is this AI was able to find those vulnerabilities. So imagine now this AI can get in the wrong hands. There are security threats to all of these core national security. And so what Anthropic was saying is we're just going to give it to these big companies and then let them use it to help figure out their security vulnerabilities so they can go fix it.
Yeah.
But this is mind-boggling in terms of the risks that are out there. Barry, question?
Yeah, I was just gonna say I haven't seen it in the New York Times, but on a Threat Intel report, basically in a Threat Intel sharing forum, that mentioned that Anthropic was releasing a model that they
Yeah.
think we're not ready to use yet. So
Exactly. Exactly. And again, just think about this. We are so early in the journey here. If that is a risk we're experiencing in year three of the AI, the Gen AI journey, what is year 10 going to look like in terms of the potential risks here? Right. And then the other risks, misinformation and trust, Matthias, you brought that up as well. I think that's going to be a huge risk. And the other one is relationships. I think this one is underhyped, this
Mhm.
potential risk, but relationships, right? Like how humans this is fundamental to humans, right?
You mean
And
I can't ask ChatGPT to write a difficult email to my mother for me about certain things?
or your wife.
Exactly. Automatic text message responses and things
Exactly.
like that.
Between your AI and her AI,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
Exactly. So you can see where that's going. We already have in this world a fertility rate crisis. I think AI is going to exacerbate that fertility rate crisis, right? So these are some really big problems, and some of these are new problems, right? If I think about the type of security, and this is what I mean when I often talk about AI risk, I talk about the surface area of risk is fundamentally expanded over previous technological risks that we've gone through.
So a quick final question, and we'll open it up for Q&A because we have at least 21 more minutes or so. But if you were in our student shoes, right? Imagine mid to late 20s, maybe early 30s, looking to change careers,
Mhm.
decent undergrad, very good undergrad, very smart, all that stuff. But you know, what skills would you double down on in this AI driven world? I mean, you're traditionally trained, and not traditionally, I mean, you're way ahead of many, but in the end of the day, I mean, you've worked in education, right? You've taught SAIS students microeconomics and trade theory and things like that. So yeah, give us a sense.
I think the paradigm shift, and I brought this up earlier, is to move away from specialization.
Yeah.
If I were to give one piece of advice, I would say don't over specialize, don't hyper specialize. Because what is specialization? Specialization at the end of the day is a bank of knowledge and pattern recognition that you've acquired. these AI systems are going to be way better than you on that
Yeah.
because they're going to have not only the knowledge you have and the pattern recognition you have, they're going to have the knowledge and the pattern recognition of any person who's worked in that field, right? So you're not going to be able to compete with that. Right. And so there will always be a need for specialists, right? But the way I think about the world of specialists is going to be the way of sports athletes, right? The way of athletes is there's a tiny, tiny, tiny 0.001% of athletes can ever have a career in their sport.
Yeah.
And right now, specialists are everywhere. But I think in the future, it's going to be 0.011, 0.001% of specialists, lawyers, doctors, right, whatever, are going to have
Surgeons. Yep. Yep.
a proficient career. The rest of us, I think, need to become special generalists, right? And need to build pattern recognition across different areas and be able to have the skills to challenge these things and work with these things and the critical thinking again and the mental models across different disciplines in ways that you can then manage and work with these systems as opposed to being substituted by these systems. Does that make sense?
Yeah, in Dutch we have a great expression. It's called vakidioot, meaning like a field idiot. Like so, you only know
Exactly.
a subfield of a subfield, right? Like so you're very, you know, all the literature. You're very specialized in it.
Yeah.
You're up to date with it,
Yeah.
but you don't. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
basically, you're telling everybody to become Renaissance men and women, which
Yes.
is
Yes.
probably a good thing.
Yes.
All right, I have many more questions, but I'm aware that this is supposed to be for you guys, and so anything in this space and in this field that you wanted to ask, Guru, please go ahead. Let's start with you, Aram. Go ahead.
Thank you, Matthias, and thank you, Guru. That was really wonderful. Um, my question would be, you brought up how a lot of these innovations in various industries, it's going to completely upend so much of society all across the board. Um, what I would want to know is, um, given the entire financial model of how these data centers are being constructed in terms of how much processing power and as well as just how much energy they're taking up all across the board, um, do you kind of see that being almost like an Achilles heel? Do you obviously the cost of GPUs, DPUs, and other type of chips is going to decrease. There'll be various innovations as the industry matures, but do you kind of see it as though this will almost become like almost from the perspective of like a national security importance, where the government may even subsidize them to some extent for the sake of the economy and for broader cybersecurity and other national security purposes? I'm kind of intrigued by your view on that.
Yeah.
And what I would just tack on just one quick point to that. Sorry, I hope this isn't too much of a tangent here, but I mean, it's clear that they're obviously subsidizing this to a large extent, especially as private companies. How would that kind of interact with the private sector in terms of the enterprise model, given the fact that right now, I mean, like I'm a Max user, it's $100 a month, but that should probably be closer to $5,000 to even $20,000. And if the government is subsidizing these large language model companies and their operation, how would that work? Anyway,
Yeah.
that was more than a mouthful. Thank you.
No, excellent question, especially because there is a bit of a political backlash in the US against it, right? Whether it's data centers, the energy, whether it's water, whether it's scared of labor markets. So go ahead, Guru.
No, and I think there was a couple points there that were made. I'll try to tackle both of these. One is, I think you were asking a question fundamentally of, are there any constraints, I think, Aram, you were trying to ask, that would actually impede the exponential growth of this? And could energy constraints be one of them, right? Like as these things improve exponentially, if they require more than exponential energy resources, that would be a constraint, for instance, right? And so that I think that is the biggest one, right? That I would talk about is the energy constraint. I could see being an issue. At the same time, we're nowhere near that yet in terms of hitting those constraints. The amount of dollars that private companies have invested in AI is unparalleled in human history, right? We've seen no other, like we're talking, hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars by individual companies adding up to trillions of dollars. Never before have we seen something like that, right? Um, I think energies could become a constraint at some point, but we're nowhere near that bottleneck. And I imagine if that's the case, these companies then will invest tremendous amounts to unlock the energy barrier, which could actually have good second order effects for society, right? So that could be a good thing. In terms of where national security and so on and so forth, that is the argument of the current administration, right? That this is actually, if we don't do it, China's going to do it. So we should have, no holds barred. There should be no constraints. This is a national security thing. There's some truth to that, but what I would argue is, let me use an example again: nuclear power plants, nuclear energy. Right? That was also similarly construed at one point. And what happened? We had some big accidents. Okay. And what happened? Trust was broken. And when that trust was broken, what happened to our nuclear agenda? It stopped, right? So having no guardrails is not the answer to saying, so to me, saying that this is a national interest, security interest, is not mutually exclusive of having guardrails. Like guardrails, smart guardrails can actually accelerate your innovation, can actually protect your innovation, et cetera, et cetera. I almost think about that as insurance on your investment. If you're a company and you've invested $100 million in AI, and if anything goes wrong tomorrow with the AI, that derails your $100 million investment. Why wouldn't you invest in protecting it, in putting guardrails around it, so on and so forth? So I don't see those as mutually exclusive. I think it was it Saeed next?
Yeah, Saeed, go ahead.
Yeah, good to see you, Matthias, and thank you, Guru, for joining us today. A few months ago, I was talking to Ethan Malik at the Wharton School. You probably know him, and he did specifically say, um, "I'm not worried about the privacy issue because it's no longer relevant with AI. I'm not worried about like AI stealing my data." So I'm curious your reaction to that. And my second question is I work with Fortune 500 companies, and most of them now look beyond AI to agentic AI, super intelligence, quantum computing, and all that stuff. What are the AI or emerging tech that you think will disrupt the business environment in the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah. Let me take them one by one. I actually agree with Ethan, right? The privacy boat has sailed. And it turned out nobody actually cared about their data privacy. Right? I mean, and you can see this, right? Where if you ask, this is kind of the economics joke of like revealed preference matters a lot more than what people say, right? People, if you ask anyone, they'll be like, oh yeah, I care about my data privacy. I care about my data privacy. And then companies steal your data and nobody cares, right? So that I agree with Ethan. Nobody cared about their data at the end of the day. Facebook steals your data all the time. Sorry, Meta steals your data all the time. Google steals your data all the time. Apple steals your data all the time. Nobody cared, right? And so I agree with him. And if you look through my list of the risks of AI, privacy was not one of them. I just don't think it's now again, if it's specific, like your social security number, your bank account, like yeah, okay. But what my digital privacy, nobody cared about that in the end, Said. And I think that's just a revealed preference. People have shown us that they didn't care about it in the end, right? So I don't think that one is rises to the first level of risks. Your second question is around what are some of the big technologies? Look, there's a lot of technological innovation going on out there. I'm not going to pretend to know all of them and kind of how sophisticated they are and kind of the implications, stuff in the healthcare space, stuff in quantum computing. I just don't have that much expertise on those. And so I'll stick to what I know. And I will say the agentic AI technology, which I'm very familiar with. My team builds agentic AIs. I'm invested in companies that are building agentic AI. I think it's going to be transformative. And here's why. Here's the other part of this, right? This is going to be a classic trope of technological diffusion. The rate of innovation of technology always moves much faster than the rate of adoption of technology, right? Because, and you guys have all probably studied this even in Matthias's course, which is it takes other factors to be able to adopt a technology. You need to figure out what the use cases are. You need to get humans trained and using it. You need to redesign your workflow. Like all these things need to happen, right? And so we have many, many years of adoption ahead of us to even catch up to where that technology is today. Okay. And as I mentioned before, that technology is only getting better. So we have decades of adoption ahead of us that are going to transform the business world and other aspects of our lives with this agentic AI.
Excellent. Mary from Montreal.
Yes, hi.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much for these insights. I had a question regarding what do you think are the lessons we can learn from Europe in terms of policy? It's always good to see someone starting first because you can learn from the experience, especially here in Canada where you have different policies per province. When you're a practitioner, especially I'm in the cyber risk space, it's a lot of headache, especially if you're dealing with Europe and different countries and different provinces. It's a lot of headache. And also in the cyber risk space, I have been involved into launching agentic AI products, but I always have in the back of my mind the question of the decision-making responsibility. Who is responsible for that legally, basically? Because when you look at the demo, at some point you let the machine decide what's going on. So how can we define that and what are the risks that we see there? Do you think that Europe policy can solve that problem? To circle back to the beginning of my question.
Let me start with the latter part of your question and the first part. So that point that you're making is at the crux of AI risk. And that is who is accountable? One of the biggest reasons that self-driving cars have not taken off at scale is because we have not figured out that accountability problem. They are actually safer, significantly safer, almost on every dimension than human drivers. We should all want a world full of self. Have you driven? I actually hopped in a Waymo the other day. It was such a cool experience.
Yep.
Right?
San Francisco has it way more than other cities for sure.
Yeah. Has it come to DC yet?
I haven't seen it at scale. I've seen a few practicing, but
Okay. I actually rode mine in Austin, and it was such a neat experience. But anyways, my point being, the reason we haven't figured out it, one of the key things we haven't figured out is when there will be accidents. Of course, there will be accidents, just much less than with human drivers. But when they do occur, who's accountable?
Who's to blame? Yeah.
What's the process? Like if I get into a bumper with you, Mary, we both get out. I know what the process is. We both get out. We look at each other. You blame me. I blame you. Whatever. I'm kidding. But like we get the insurance information. We know what the process is going to be. That gives us trust in the system, even when something goes wrong. We don't know that here, right? And that needs to be figured out. And so it's not just the safety and trust of the technology. It's a safety and trust of when things go wrong, what happens? And we have not figured that out yet. And so that's a really important point, and that's part of the challenge of this technology today. The next part that you asked, how's the EU here and will it? Look, here's the challenge. As much as the US is just like innovate, no regulation, which I think is wrong, I don't understand Europe's posture either, right? And so the EU AI Act went out in, I want to say December of 23, early 24, okay? And they said, oh, and it went out and then you have 2.5 years. 2.5 years in the AI timeframe is a lifetime. The stuff that they wrote then is so out of date, some of it, right? They don't even account for agentic capabilities in the original drafting. If you're going to move at that pace, why bother? Right? So that's my criticism there. So I was actually quite excited for them to take a stab at this, but maybe in classic, not to be insult my European peers here in any shape or fashion, but like in classic European fashion, it ended up taking too long and too big, and I don't know what the benefit is. And now they're talking about pushing it back to 27. And I think, so I think, again, they had a lot of potential to set the stage, kind of like they did with GDPR. Now it's unknown, and I don't think it's comprehensive enough to tackle some of the new risks that have come up in the last year or so.
No, you love this story, Guru. I was out in California in late October and visiting an old friend who's a graduate from Stanford who goes to all the football games. I think it was homecoming weekend.
Yeah.
So we're sitting watching Stanford game, and some team from Florida, I forgot. But behind me, I heard this familiar accent in French accent, was Brussels accent. And I was like, oh my God, you guys are Belgian. What are you doing here? You study here? He's like, no. We just had a startup here. And they went through the whole sort of we tried to get funding for our AI ID. And, a bunch of conservative banks immediately say, no, way too risky. What are you going to do about regulation? So on. So one of their American friends said, come over to California. And there they were. So just again, you read these stories every day. But so one final question for you, given that this is in the end, this sort of broad geopolitical, geoeconomics program. One thing I haven't asked you about is that what people are obsessed with in Washington, D.C. is this race between China and the U.S., right?
Yeah.
And it seems almost existential, right? Like who's gonna win this? And so a few questions on this. Do you agree that the U.S. is ahead? Because I think most people in D.C. do. Number two is that there are two views, right? One of the view is sort of the Biden administration view, which is like, let's deny them every advanced stuff we have through export controls and a very sophisticated sort of geoeconomic toolkit where we keep it all here in the US or with our allies at least, and deny China this stuff. And then there's the Jensen Huang from NVIDIA view, which is like, listen, we're already ahead. Let's give them the latest stuff. It'll make them lazy. They'll adopt it. They'll find it great. And then we'll stay ahead. This way. So where are you on these questions?
I think it's a lot more nuanced. I mean, the Jensen Huang one is obviously very self-serving.
Yeah,
I mean, right? So
a lot of things are self-serving in Trump's Washington, D.C. Let's be fair.
I wouldn't take his point of view too seriously on this. Look, I think there's a bunch of different things here. One is on the fundamental model capabilities, right? I don't know if they're behind us. Right? They have some models that are quite capable. We haven't seen like very clear and dispositive head-to-head tests in a way, but I would not at all be surprised if they had the capabilities. And especially, here's one of the funny things about being worried about China, right? If you have an immigration policy that then sends talented Chinese folks scurrying out of this country back to their home country to develop AI, how are you helping America against China, right? Like, so there's some internal contradictions between this MAGA movement around kind of this competition with China, right?
So we've moved a very long way from Paul Krugman writing in the New York Times that we should staple green cards to Chinese scientists' graduate degrees. Let's just kind of keep them here,
right? I mean, if you think that is the number one threat, that's
exactly
closer to the optimal policy, right? So, I don't think that. And then the other dimension is not only the actual models themselves, but it's the supply chain of it, right? So then you start thinking about semiconductors. Then you start talking about, who mentioned this earlier, Aram, energy, right? Who's investing in energy to be able to support the compute? Well, China's ahead of us on that for sure. How do you think about kind of the other factors? I have a friend of mine who knows kind of all the different materials, raw materials that are needed to go into the supply chain of AI systems, right? So, and then there's of course the talent paradox, right? So there's other elements of not just where are you today, but where are you in terms of these other inputs? And so if you look at that, it's a much more nuanced kind of position of the US versus China. And then the other challenge here then is, if that's the only consideration, then you have a bit of a race to the bottom. So it almost probably reminds, Matthias, you're more of an expert on this than I am, but like people who are experts of kind of previous metaphors or analogies of this, the Cold War, for example, right? The arms race, for instance, the race to the bottom, and like what can we learn from there that can actually apply here, right? And one of those things is at some point there is going to be, in my view, some amount of cooperation that's going to be required. Otherwise, the race to the bottom is going to have externalities on both sides, right? And so at some point, we're going to have to partner with China on this. And so what is that going to look like? I don't know, but that's got to be part of the solution.
Yep. Well, we're out of time, unfortunately, but speaking just for myself, this was hugely interesting and informative. I think everybody here will join me in thanking you for your time, Guru, and you're always welcome back to SAIS. I know we're too slow for you and probably don't pay enough, but that's a different story. Anyway, great to have you, and let me hand it back to Dorothy, who can send us home, I guess.
Thank you again, Guru, for such a great conversation. I had a question myself, but we're out of time, so I'm just going to email you the question.
Yeah, email me the question. No problem.
I'll email you the question. But for everyone that joined us today, whether you're a major student or you're not external, or I even saw an alumni even here, So just thank you so much for dedicating your time to joining us on these conversations. I look forward to hosting more of these sessions, and hopefully I look forward to seeing you all as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Matthias, for also moderating this conversation as well. It was a pleasure, truly, to hear the different interesting points that were made during the session. So thank you all again, and hope you all have a good rest of your day, night, afternoon, wherever you're located at.
Dorothy, Matthias, thank you so much for having me. A pleasure meeting you all. Have a great evening.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.